This is not at all the career that I wanted. And I think my book could be identified with by a lot of people who had the blessings of unanswered prayers. Had I gone to Congress, I would have not likely settled in with my second wife, with whom we adopted 3 children. In your philosophy of butterfly effect, whether that child, your child, would be the same child later. My 3 children were being born in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, on another timeline. And the fact that I was in the position to go there, I feel like that is the best proof of God that I've ever seen.
Welcome back to AudioLife, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. Today, I continue my conversation with McCracken Poston Jr., where we continue to talk about his friendship with Alvin Ridley, but also fatherhood, his life philosophy, blended families, and so much more. I hope you enjoy. Okay, so we talked about payment. If it's okay, I want to bring us back to him testifying. Is it okay to jump in there?
Yeah. Okay. Which was never the plan. It was never the plan for Alvin to testify. And here's why. Alvin would say, I would say, we need to talk about Virginia. He would say, no, we don't, because I didn't kill her, but the government did take my van.
Mm-hmm. Which was connected in his mind.
Yeah.
So his testifying, we were speaking earlier about, the one kind of big embarrassing moment in the trial was your expert witness who turned out to not be qualified as that expert witness. And when I read the story, I knew there was some build up to this character, but to be honest, it didn't impact me. While I saw the turn in the case not going for you, it didn't impact me the way that it may have felt in the moment, because that same day, Alvin took the stand, and that was so much more impactful. And you have talked about, both on this podcast and in the book, that was not the plan, and that, in fact, intentionally, you wanted to keep him off the stand. And you let him have lunch with some friends, some church friends, and he came back and told you that Jesus spoke to him, that Jesus visited, and he was going to go on the stand. And as you've noted, that's his choice. So talk to us about that. Absolutely pivotal in the case and in the story.
I was so disillusioned with the performance of our internet acquired expert that I just was disillusioned. I was tired. Alvin had this little following that started showing up. Salesman Sam, the character who sold items out of a bicycle basket, he was always around. I just thought, I don't think I can sit with this crowd at one table. Plus, these church people, they really make it a full table. So at least Alvin's got fans here. And as you remember from the end of the book, he only started going to that church after indictment. He was a foxhole Christian in that moment. And so I just sat at another table. I just needed to think. And that's where I missed Jesus showing up. He didn't pick up the tab, I might add, but, because I had to do that. And Alvin tells me on the way back to the courthouse that Jesus appeared before him. He mentioned a physical appearance. And so I knew it was Alvin's right, but I had kept out some weird stuff, some weird allegations. One was about Alvin's mother. There's a long sub-story about that, how social services tried to get to his mother. Well, there's a theory that they were really trying to flush Virginia out because her family was still actively doing that. Alvin and his mother took it very offensively that the state of Georgia was trying to come in on and see how she was being kept, see her care. and Alvin's mother was in her 80s then. I later determined when I found all the writings that they did it to themselves. And I also found out when I had the judge do what's called an in-camera inspection of the social services records. They had solicited help from the agency. And then when the agency showed up wanting to investigate, they completely repelled and rejected. And Alvin slips his mother across the state line to a hospital where they deem her competent and able to be where she wants to be, and thwarting the Georgia authorities. Well, Alvin, that's just one of Alvin's stories, how he outsmarted those social workers. And a lot of Alvin's stories begin of how he outsmarted a state trooper, he outsmarted some deputies. And it's just Alvin brag is what I call it. So I just knew and kept out a lot of this stuff in pre-trial motions, including about Kitty and Meowie Ridley. Mm-hmm. I kept all that out. And if Alvin put his good character into evidence, which in normal conversation we would all do.
Right.
We would say, oh, I would never do that. Well, that's putting your good character into evidence, and it would unleash the floodgates for all the stuff that I had kept out. So I took Alvin to the roach-infested courtroom, back into that courtroom, because it had been fumigated, but I put him on the stand, and I just showed him the different perspective of sitting from in the stand now. And there's where the jury is going to be really close to you. In Georgia, all witness stands are closest to the jury box so they can be heard. And I was hoping the change of perspective would make him maybe think of it again. But he was resolute. He said, the Lord came into the cafeteria or wherever they ate, Trackside Cafe, and he filled my heart and told me that I had to testify. And so we practiced a little bit, and I showed him where he could go wrong. I said, just don't say anything good about yourself, like a proclamation. And but I had to know Alvin was this salesman Sam's idea.
Yeah.
And that's when he famously said, no, it was Jesus. He's taller. And if you got the vision of Salesman Sam, he's this little guy with a long beard that might be mistaken for Jesus in some circles. I don't know. But Alvin wanted to make sure that I knew that it wasn't Salesman Sam. He could distinguish between Jesus and Salesman Sam. Jesus is taller.
Oh, that's such a great visual. I love that.
And he was so sincere.
Yeah.
I had to. I could not. Of course, I couldn't legally keep him from testifying.
Yeah.
But the whole idea was that the minute he started talking about his van being taken in 1984, like that was the big mystery to solve.
Yeah.
You know, Virginia wrote a proposed script to the Unsolved Mysteries TV show.
Right.
Don't know if she sent it, but I had a draft where she's wanting to talk about Alvin's father's mysterious car accident resulting in the taking of their van, 2 years later. So she shared every one of his paranoid conspiratorial views of the world. And then, there's something special about that, somebody who'll share those with you. That's a tight bond.
It is. Yeah. It sounds like they saw the world the same way. They understood it in a similar way. And to your point earlier, she may have been the one at points or maybe more than at points that was convincing him of her view of the world.
I found a glossary, and I don't know where she got it because, maybe there's a dictionary in that house. There's everything else in that house. Mm-hmm. But here's a glossary of legal terms. That's like she's educating Alvin. This is what this means. This is, and it was pretty fascinating to me because I really do think that she was probably the more literate of the two. Even though Alvin is literate, he can read and write. One of the sweetest things in the world was an old letter I found from him to her that she had saved. And it was saying just the sweetest things like, Virginia, you're the only woman who has ever really understood me. And I got that into evidence, hoping that the jury would open it up and read it. And I call it the love bomb I'm planting with the jury. So I don't know if they read it or not, but because of the roach infestation of the first courtroom, which I hate that courtroom. It's windowless. It's built in 1982. No, it's just a rectangular, it's like a shoebox. Because of the roaches that were infesting Virginia's writings in Alvin's suitcases, and he's like he brought in a whole new load of roaches every day. It's like he's contracted to bring roaches to that courtroom, and he is delivering them. And the jurors mentioned it on Forensic Files. And so I was hoping people weren't seeing it, but I was like trying to get away from them and step on them. And the judge, though, realized that his office was right next to that courtroom. And so he said, Mr. Poston, we're doing the rest of this trial in the old courthouse, thanks to your client, infesting the place. When we went into the old courtroom and took her writings, that was the courtroom, September 15, 1970, the last place Virginia had ever been seen. I was overcome with the eeriness of that because it was so profound to me that now we're reuniting her writings with her ghost.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not a ghost person, I felt such eeriness. And Alvin broke the whole thing by turning around and staring and leaning over and saying, "Your daddy's here," which sent me into a tailspin because I thought, I've got so much on my plate. If my dad is drunk and showing up at this trial, this is going to be the lowest of lows. But my dad was sober, and he was mostly sober for the next 10 years. And it was in my memory and in my sister's collective memories, the first thing that I had ever done that he had ever come to where he was completely sober. And I was bearing down on 40.
Yeah.
It was I don't know. It was like it gave me energy.
Yeah.
It gave me a new kind of energy. Now, when I forgot a lot of this stuff. And my sister said, "Oh, we've got our mother's journals, which none of us want to read because we're going to feel like we're going to get our feelings hurt." Because my mother, not as prolific as Virginia, but my mother kept a diary. And I simply wanted to find the dates that Alvin and I came to their house, because my parents were very calming to Alvin. They were very kind to him. And they were up in Graysville, so they didn't have the Ringgold mindset of having a bad encounter with him or something, or getting yelled at by him. So in my mother's journals, though, I'm reading about our father's intervention. I had completely repressed that. And it opened up my mind to what was really going on then. And it made me remember the relief of my father being sober in the courtroom, that just something I didn't have to worry about. And it also, the Chattanooga newspapers had just merged and they were covering the trial. And while I'm writing this book, I thought there's got to be some photos, and I was thinking, outside of the courtroom. And then I realized, no, they had permission to shoot inside. So at the Chattanooga Public Library, I found there in the research area, reference library, 240 some odd photos from the trial.
Hmm.
And of course, there's this joyous ending. And there's 3 photos of my dad whispering something to Alvin and embracing him. And it was just so powerful. I just thought, I've got to put my dad in this book.
Yeah.
And it really became memoir at that point. It became about relationship with my dad. It became the realization that my neurotic tendencies probably came from being an adult child of an alcoholic parent who was constantly trying to find the way to smooth things over and to make things calm. And I was probably the worst match for Alvin as a lawyer. But I had to learn Alvin. I had to learn what makes him tick, and I had to learn the transactional nature. But mainly just to respect his views, even though they were far-fetched. And ultimately, when he testified, I just let him tell it all, including the van, the taking of the van. At the very end of the trial, I was saying, Alvin, do you blame anybody for this? And he goes, yep, people that took my van. And that was just the perfect punctuation of, this is Alvin, folks.
Yes.
And he charmed them. I knew that when the jurors were chuckling in a murder trial, that we could be in much worse shape, because they really realized my struggle. And they also thought it kind of funny, my struggle. And so I like to tell people that everything that's funny in the book is at my expense. And the thing that I'm most excited about the reviews of the book by individuals, I had a lot of people approach me and say, I have an autistic grandson, or I have a neurodivergent child. And they smile and they say, I knew from page 1. I wrote it I remembered my ignorance. And I wrote it from that position of ignorance about what made Alvin tick. And then, of course, only in the epilogue do I reveal.
Yeah.
But I'm touched that I'm able to describe it in a way that keeps Alvin's dignity. Alvin is a very dignified person, and even in the squalor, and even if he's wearing the same clothes until they're falling off, even though my secretary and I have a constant order from Land's End about every 3 months for more seasonal. There's a plug there, Land's End. If you want to ever call us for a little print ad, I can get Alvin involved. But he will wear them until they fall off, and then he'll show up and he'll say, "Hey, the rats ate a hole through this pocket." And I'm thinking, why would the rats eat a hole in a pants pocket? And then we go to lunch that day, and Alvin grabs an extra roll and sticks it in his pocket. So he's obviously leaving the food in his pants.
That's why.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's all logical.
Well, I thought that you were very honest and vulnerable and transparent in your writing of this story. And as you said, you remembered the state that you were in and put yourself back in those shoes. And it sounds like the success of the case, the success of Alvin testifying, was people seeing him for who he was, right? People really, that humanizing of him, some sense of how his mind works, the idea that him being a criminal, being a murderer was probably outrageous compared with that man that was sitting on the stand. That true, transparent, vulnerable humanity is what helped win the jurors, helped them to understand what actually happened, as opposed to the fantastical versions that were showing up in tabloids and even being reported in more reputable sources.
the pharmacist, Harry Gass, who testified for the state, who had not been well prepared, and he had a very short retention of records and, unfortunately, memory at that age. They put him up to say that he had never provided medicines for Virginia. And because Alvin is such a pack rat, we had the bottles still. We had years of bottles. And one of Virginia's writings was, in September of 1977, God told her to stop taking her medicine. God's going to take care of her. Well, in Virginia's history, she would occasionally have an allergic reaction to the medicines.
Right.
Which was worse than a seizure. So I could understand her wanting to do that. She also wrote why she never went out. She wrote that they were still, she was still mad at her own family. So pharmacist Harry Gass got put up, and Alvin was just serene. And that's when he loved the man. He said, Harry saved my life twice.
Yeah.
And he described these really funny instances where Harry saves his life, like when Alvin got the Hong Kong flu, and Alvin speaks in finalities. On day 7, you die. Like everybody dies on day 7 of the Hong Kong flu. Yeah. And Harry heroically makes Alvin's father take him medicine on day 6 and saves his life. Well, however that went down, Alvin interprets it as a close call where Harry Gass saved his life. Well, interestingly, it was Harry's sons who Alvin felt were his tormentors. They were little boys. They were little boys. Unfortunately, one of them grew up to be the arresting officer, which added insult to injury. But he was always kind to Alvin. And he's now a magistrate judge in our county. And he told me when I was getting permission to put his photo in the book, he said, I feel terrible because we were just kids. And Alvin and Virginia would get so amped up about even a slight from a kid. Yeah. And of course, it's kind of fueling each other because the kids, they're going, hey, there's an adult that's having a reaction to us. We can smart off to him. And so Alvin carried the water of their, disputes until well into their adulthoods, which is why he didn't stop at the ambulance station at the fire hall.
Yeah.
Because one of the Gass boys was the fire chief. And so he now loves them. He had me do a video of telling them how much he loved their father and mother. And it's just that Alvin is so kind. And this lack of emotion that everybody said he had, with neurodivergent people, it's not a lack of emotion. It's just a different timing of emotion.
Yeah.
Alvin was very emotional about his wife's death in my office many times. He was very emotional about my parents when they passed, because I think he knows the significance of that. They kind of kept me in the case.
Yeah.
So, Alvin's just a special guy. Fortunately, my secretary of the last 15 years, her job just before working for me was with developmentally disabled adults. And she knew Alvin was special before either one of us knew what his diagnosis was. And so we just continued to serve Alvin over the years. He got caught up in a scam one time that took money from him. And he came to me, and I just took his phone over to AT&T and said, change his number. Handed it back to him and said, don't answer those calls anymore.
Yeah.
And so, and that's when I said, and this was probably about 15 years ago, I said, Alvin, have you had your flu shot? I'm about to go get my flu shot. No? Well, go with me to get my flu shot. And we went to a pharmacy, and I said, I'll take you to lunch. The whole transactional nature kicked back in. And I said, Alvin, why don't we get together every now and then? Well, he showed up the same day the next week. And we've been going to lunch now for like 15 years. And now it's twice a week. And so, you know what? I used to dread going out with him because he would stare at people. He would not always smell the best. I worried about some tight crowd situations. But now his hygiene does not bother me at all now. It's just, you know, I finally see the humanity, the human behind all that. And I try to apply that now to other clients and other cases.
Yeah. Well, we're going to shift our conversation just a little bit. And before we do, I have just one topic I want to still bring up about the book, and it's the title. So tell me about the significance of the title.
And now for a word from our sponsors. Ready to share your stories and life philosophy? Or capture those of a parent or grandparent? Or maybe a corporate package is right for you to build connection across your workforce and add value to your clients. Visit audiolife.io today to learn more. Our listeners will get 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. AudioLife, where memories find their voice.
Well, I had help on the subtitle. And I'm like a bull in a china shop of publishing. I don't understand how this industry works, but there are definite delicate things. For example, one of my editors said, you know, a lot of people, when you are signing off on an email or a letter, you say best. And that's just a code for something. And that's not me. That's not the way I talk. And I might have done it once and I felt so stupid doing it. But I'm always stepping on things and making them mad. And so I've sent more flowers to more people at my publisher's office and other places that I just blindly go forward without asking permission first. And then I'm having to send flowers and making up. And one of them was the audiobook. You know, this is my book. There are a lot of strangely pronounced place names in my area. A lot of Native American history and gave us a lot of our place names. And then a lot of Southernerizations of other names that we don't say the same, like the town that's named for the French general that helped us in the Revolutionary War is not Lafayette, it's Lafayette. And I was just wanting all the places to be properly pronounced if it's not me doing the book. Well, apparently, you know, that's an industry in and of itself, audiobooks. It's something that they sell, publisher sells. They have professional, very good voice talent. Well, I still wanted to try out. So my editor frustratingly said, well, you won't get it, but if you want to read a page and send it in. And I thought, yeah, they're just making me play a game here. So I just thought I'll write the audiobook people and say, hey, I'm here for you, either to try out or to give you a pronunciation guide. Oh, it made my editor furious. It made my agent furious. And I was afraid they were going to drop me and just stop it all and, you know, burn the books or whatever. So I had to send them both flowers. And the title I wanted all along because people had a lot of names for Alvin. And in big party I threw after I got a continuance of the case, one of my new wife's friends, they were all about 12 years younger than me. So it's this whole new generation of people who didn't remember Alvin when he was open and doing business. They just knew this guy that hung out at this shuttered building with the big Zenith sign out in front. And so Jeff Keith sees me. I'm wanting to relax and have a party. And he shows up and he says, "Oh, I've been seeing you representing the Zenith Man." And I thought, what a great name for Alvin. And I kind of joked that I'm sure the Zenith Corporation won't mind the association. And it's just a great name in a couple of ways, because if anything, both Alvin and myself, we were at our nadir. We were not at the top of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that was a brand that he loved, that my father loved. My father, someone who was not also at his zenith. And so it just seemed to be a real ironic title in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe we all got there.
Yeah, absolutely.
By the end of the story. And I mean, I really feel like we did. At least my father did and Alvin did. And I think through the experience, I did.
Yeah. It's very poetic. Something struck me in the title. Alvin had these different characters that he played. He was called the Boogeyman. He had his dressing up as Santa and begging at Christmas, right, or at the festivals. He had the, bouncing from church to church and scaring children, scaring neighbors, right? These characters that did not shine the best light on him. But what did was his TV sales and service years. And it sounded like there was nobody who, he was known beyond your town for how well he could service televisions. And it was part of what brought your father closer into kind of respecting and understanding Alvin, was the negotiation that they had over the Zenith television that he purchased. And so I felt like it really memorialized that point in Alvin's life where he was finding his success. He wasn't understood yet by everybody, but he was in that right place for him to serve in the right place at the right time. And it helped to memorialize that character, that version of who Alvin was. It's also, as you note in the book, what Alvin chose to literal, of course, but it's what he chose to memorialize himself on his own tombstone, the TV repairman.
That's classic neurodivergence. I'm gonna hold up something for you that I did not put in the book, but it's a special treat.
Oh, that's good.
That's Alvin. On one of the nights that I pulled him in off the street, he was not begging. He was handing out hard candy.
Okay.
Complete choke hazards to younger children.
Right.
But I don't know where he gets some of the stuff that he brings. It'll be like, I didn't know they still made that. And I'm thinking, what's the date on that bag? But he was just being a person who was giving joy.
Yeah.
But 5 weeks before his murder trial, that just threw me away. But I recognized him by his scent and his hands.
Yeah.
And I just, the following year, he also was out doing it. I asked him, does he still have the Santa suit? And he says it's pretty rough shape, but I'm sure he still has it.
Well, it sounds like he's stored many things in his house. He's held on to just about everything.
I think everything.
Yeah. Well, so at this point in our conversation, I want to shift a little bit to what we call a life philosophy segment. Just learning from your experience, from your years, some of the wisdom that you've learned and that you have to share with us. The first question I have on that is, how do you define success, and how do you feel you've achieved it?
Well, this is not at all the career that I wanted. And I think my book could be identified with by a lot of people who have had the blessings of unanswered prayers. Had I gone to Congress, I would have not likely settled in with my second wife, with whom we adopted 3 children. Now, in your philosophy of the butterfly effect, whether your child would be the same child later. My 3 children were being born in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
On another timeline. And the fact that I was in the position to go there when we went there, 2 trips, I feel like that is the best proof of God that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so and probably my success in Alvin's case led to other cases and fees that I didn't have to tear a building down for. And that put me in a better financial shape to travel around the world and become a father. My daughter's back at home, and my sons came with me to New York this trip, and I just have had a lot of time to look at them now, both young men. I think I put in the book when Alvin was very interested in our journey, and I explained to him that Kazakhstan is the ancestral origin of apples. And so when I show up with these babies, Alvin shows up with apples, like they're going to take a bite out of them, and they didn't have a tooth between them.
Of course.
But, Alvin's always a step off, but it's such a sweet step.
Yeah.
That you understand. Like I said, he'll show up with chocolate covered cherries. I don't even know where you get those anymore, but somehow he finds them, and that's his go-to gift for the ladies in the office. So it's just philosophy of life. I think be ready for the surprise blessings. Had you told me when I was in high school trying to sell this guy a yearbook ad and basically leaving his establishment thinking that's the weirdest guy I've ever met, and hostile, to think that I would have this friendship with him and care for him, love him, along with my ex-wife and everybody else around me, has completely shifted their view of him.
Yeah.
That's a blessing in and of itself. And I hope that people will think that, not everybody that gets accused of crimes is guilty. But of course, not everybody that gets accused is innocent either. But there's a certain level of human dignity and kindness that I think that we all need.
Absolutely. And it's a story where that really, really comes true.
And I thank you so much for seeing that. It's funny. It's, my editor says, don't read every review. And some of the earlier ones were, I don't care so much about the part about the lawyer. And I was thinking, gosh, have I failed this project? But a lot more have been closer to the way you've experienced it. So I think if you keep an open mind that this is not your usual true crime book.
Sure. Yeah, I can understand that. But there were parts that I read where I raced through, and there are parts that I read, literally I covered the page at a few parts because I didn't want to jump ahead until it was time. And it's, that to me is more that true crime genre. But it is a story that is personal and humanizing. And that's what you were able to do for Alvin in the courtroom and what he was able to do for himself. And if that was not the story you were sharing in this book, you would have missed the whole center of it and the whole point of it.
Right.
So that's how the story needed to be told from my view.
Thank you so much.
So I want to ask you, looking back, and at any point that you want to answer this question about at any point in your life, is there anything you would have done differently?
I would be afraid to.
Yeah.
Because I would be afraid that it would have thrown me off to be here, with 3 wonderful children, and actually 4 if you count Graham, my ex's later son, who thinks of me as a dad, and I get all the great Father's Day crafts and stuff.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't change anything. I still struggle sometimes with clients who are not as able as Alvin was to eventually come around and begrudgingly trust.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if those words have ever been put together, but it was begrudgingly that Alvin would trust. And really, a little money helped. A little money here and there helped grease the gears of trust for Alvin. But I realized that it was just something within him that allowed him to open up. It's like, okay, this is a business transaction now. He's paid me. I got to show up with these documents.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to really do actual harm to Salesman Sam sometimes because he kept interfering with and he would advise Alvin, to have a client that I've put in a courtroom and told him, these are the same jurors we're going to be picking your case from.
Mm-hmm.
Please sit here and take notes, only to find out that he is an hour away in a federal courthouse being detained for giving the federal marshals the bum's rush, dousing himself with gasoline, and going into the judge's office to complain about me. That's an experience. And talk about public humiliation. Every lawyer, the DA, the judges, everybody knew what I was going through. And so I did feel vindicated when Alvin's jury came back. And I felt, after the congressman ordered him to stay away from his congressional offices, I felt vindicated for Alvin. and it was like a little, okay, I won this one.
Yeah. That's great. A couple more for you. What are you most proud of in your life?
I would say this book and having a wonderful family, even though it's technically a broken one. My ex and I always conspired against our children together. And I think that's the secret of a two household parenting is you have to conspire against your children. And that's the secret. And Allison has been great with that. And I think that we have very level-headed children because of that. We would not let them work us.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll amend one word and just call it a blended family as opposed to a broken family. It's not broken.
Exactly. That's the best way to do it. I'm going to start saying that now. But I didn't always feel that way. But one of the things that philosophically changed me was when Graham was born.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here's a little kid that I could have some regrets about a failed marriage, but he's here because of that failed marriage. And that completely changed my outlook on things. So I think I wrote a better book in my 60s than I would have written in my 40s.
Yes.
Because of the changing philosophies. I think everybody was acting on what they thought was their best. Everybody was doing their job. And that's what the system of justice, I really get frustrated. The word justice has almost been perverted to be vengeance. And maybe just it's our culture or marketing of movies. So a lot of people equate the word justice with vengeance. The show American Justice. This was an episode in it called Death in a Small Town. And the producer said, this is a very popular episode, although some people are saying, how's that justice? He got away with it.
Mm.
So we have a root problem that I wish we could start in about the fourth grade of educating people about our system of justice is our best approach at making sure the right thing happens, because, applying the rules of evidence, keeping things from being wrongfully convicted. It's just this was true justice.
It was. It leads me to my last question. So in your 60s, you've put forward the book and the story that you feel you could tell better than you could have in your 40s. You've talked about your 3 beautiful children and your in your blended family, the 4th child, Graham. You alluded earlier on that maybe there are some more stories, maybe there's another book that you want to tell and want to share. What would you like your legacy to be, and why?
Well, I have loved this process. It's like a political campaign without a clear opponent. The opponent is apathy to reading. And I am a one-man army that is taking on apathy to reading. I love selling this book. I love pitching it. I love people's reaction like yours once they've read it. And I'm here in New York at this book conference, but I'm excited that I'm going to Nashville on Saturday. My book is up for the CrimeCon Clue Award Book of the Year. Now, there are a lot of good books in that category, so there's no shame to not winning it. But the fact is truly an honor to be nominated, and I'm going to milk that forever, because just being a finalist is enough to brag about. And so, especially in your first book. So I would love this feeling again. And I think that's what motivates a lot of writers is, wow, I love the way that's tasted and felt, and I'd like to experience that again. And I would, and I'm, not the youngest person in the world, but I have some great stories. And sometimes, all the time I have to get client permission to talk about clients. But I've often thought, well, I envy some of these fiction writers because they don't have to track everybody down to get their releases. So there's just some great stories, and it's all the human condition, and it's all humanity. I think people can relate to those stories.
Yeah.
And there's like Alvin and like Salesman Sam, there's some pride, even at their economic levels were just a world that I did not understand. But at the same time, I saw the dignity that they maintained themselves in. When I was trying to get Alvin out of jail, I wanted to make sure his taxes on his building were paid up so we could use it. And he was offended that I would suggest that he hadn't paid his taxes.
Yeah.
And so it just really opened my eyes that we don't always understand people. We should never go with the community word on somebody. And hopefully that's made me a more insightful person, and maybe people that read the book will be. And definitely, I'm concerned about the 5.5 million undiagnosed neurodivergent souls in the U.S. who are daily having interactions, not every one of them, but daily 1 or 2 of them are having interactions with law enforcement that they could completely be misunderstood. So there's my call to action. Absolutely.
Well, this conversation has been an absolute pleasure for me to get to have with you today. I can't thank you enough for making the time while you're already on a book tour and spending time with your sons. It's been a pleasure. Before we wrap, is there anything else you wanted to share that I haven't asked you about?
Well, Carrie, first, thank you. And I've been to Canada a couple of times, and would love to go back. So maybe there'll be a book event there one day. And but I really love that you loved the story. would like I think your listeners and readers they can identify with being at low points of your life and things not working out as you hoped or prayed for.
Yeah.
Hopefully that can guide some people out of when they're going through those times, that they can figure out a way to climb out.
Absolutely. And I'll just add, if you want to come back and test out some of your storytelling for future stories before they get published, let us know. We'd love to have another conversation.
I would love to.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. You've been listening to AudioLife, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. I've been your host today, Carrie Purcell, and today I got to speak with Mr. McCracken Poston Jr., the defense attorney, author, and part-time judge who defended and successfully acquitted Alvin Eugene Ridley from his murder trial. Remember that Alvin was not diagnosed with autism or identified as neurodivergent until decades after his trial, and yet it was his humanism, his literalism, and his transparency that helped the jury to understand that he was misunderstood. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to rate and subscribe to our show. This helps other listeners to find us and ensures that you never miss an episode. See you next time.
If you like what you heard today, consider recording your own AudioLife private podcast or giving one to a loved one for a unique and memorable gift. Today, AudioLife listeners will receive 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. Also, remember to rate our show and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode.